And we're back. Sorry, I know it's been 8 months, but we're all busy, aren't we? Anyway, let's get cracking, shall we? Chapter 7. Chapter 7. The Darkest Nights. My father returned to Pyongyang at the end of October 2002, and before long he had another shipment of metal ready to go to China. All that was missing was a burlap sack and some rope to prepare the package for the train to Hyesan. Those items were hard to find, even in the capital, but my father knew somebody in town who usually had a good supply. Ignoring my mother's advice and his own good sense, he had contacted Wan's son after he arrived in Pyongyang. That was his affair partner, Wan's son. Apparently, she was still helping him with his business because Wan's son went to purchase the rope and sack while he waited at a nearby market. What they didn't know was that detectives from the prosecutor's office, which has its own investigators, were watching the house. Probably because they had received a tip that Wan's son and possibly my father would be arriving. My father waited for about an hour, excuse me, and when Wan's son didn't return, he went looking for her. The detectives had set a trap for him at the house, but they didn't arrest him right away. Instead, they followed him, hoping he would lead them to his cache of illegal metals. But when they saw he was about to get on a bus and disappear, they grabbed him. "Are you Park Jin-sik?" one of them demanded. "Yes," my father said. And with that, each took one of his arms and placed him under arrest. Later, when my mother tried to piece together what happened, she learned that the police had arrested a copper smuggler in Pyongyang who knew about my father's operation. During her interrogation, she told the police that she could name 2 other people buying stolen metals. A big fish from Hyesan named Park Jin-sik, who worked with a young girl from Pyongyang. Wan's son was arrested at the same time as my father and sentenced to 6 months in a labor training camp. We heard that she got married to a former military officer after she finished her sentence and had a baby with him. That was possibly ordered or very much encouraged. Or it may simply be that a military officer had fallen for her, and because she was in a labor camp, she's obviously less than human at this point, and therefore it's will do what you want with trash. Oh, I've read that line. I was happy to hear that she was able to put her troubles behind her. Like everybody else, she was just trying to survive. That is true. Sadly, my father would pay a much bigger price for his crimes against the state. In November 2002, my mother came back from a visit to the post office, crying and shaking. I didn't understand why until I heard her talking to my friend Yongja's grandmother. My mother told her she had tried to call my father in Pyongyang but could not reach him. That's when she found out he'd been arrested for smuggling. My mother hoped it was all a mistake, or even a bad dream, but she knew she had to act quickly. She needed to travel to the capital and find out where my father was being held, and see if she could pay for enough money to get him out of jail. If she could pay enough money to get him out of jail. The morning my mother left for Pyongyang, she sat down with me and my sister to explain what had happened and what was going to happen next. She warned us that people will treat us differently now. They might say bad things about our family, she said. But please, try not to let it bother you too much. Your father will come home soon and will protect us. She told us we had nothing to be ashamed of, so we should laugh out loud like we always did, and act as if nothing was wrong. She kneeled before Eunmi and said, "You are the first child, and so you are the pillar of this house while I am away." She then turned to me and said, "Yeonmi, you have to help Eunmi." She left us with a bag of rice and some cooking oil. She told us there would be no money coming for a while, and that we couldn't eat like before. We had to save everything now, not waste even one grain. We walked her to the station, and as she was about to board the train, she gave us about 200 won, enough for a bit of dried beans or corn if we ran out of rice. "I'll be back as soon as I can, and I'll bring more food," she said. She then hugged us goodbye. We watched for a long time as the train pulled away. I was only 8 years old, but I felt like my childhood was departing with her. On the way back to our house, Eunmi and I saw someone selling food on the street. We stared for a long time at the candy and imported snacks from China. Our mother had never let us have these treats because they were so expensive. But we were keen to try them. Without thinking, we spent all the money our mother had left for us on a small bag of Chinese sandwich cookies and a cup of sunflower seeds. It would be more than a month before we saw our mother again. Winter had arrived, and the days got dark too quickly. The air was so cold that the door to our house kept freezing shut, and it was very difficult for us to figure out how to make a fire to heat the house and cook food. My mother had left us some firewood, but we weren't very good at chopping it into small pieces. The axe was too heavy for me, and I had no gloves. For a long time I picked splinters out of my hands. Early one evening, I was in charge of making fire in the kitchen, but I used wet wood and it started to smoke too much. My sister and I were struggling to breathe, but we couldn't open the doors or windows because they were frozen solid. We screamed and banged on the wall of our neighbor's house, but nobody could hear us. I finally picked up the axe and broke the ice to open the door. It was a miracle we survived that terrible month. The food my mother left for us ran out quickly, and by the end of December we were nearly starving. Sometimes our friends' mothers would feed us, but they were struggling too. The famine was supposed to have ended in North Korea in the late 1990s, but life was still very hard, even years later. My father's younger sister, who lived in Hyesan, had nothing to spare, and my uncle Park Jin was furious that my father had brought more trouble and disgrace to the family by getting himself arrested. It was so hurtful because my parents had always been generous with him and his family. And now we didn't feel we could ask him for help. Our neighbor, Kim Jong-ae, was a kind woman who tried to keep an eye on us. She was a party member and worked for the Military Mobilization Department, so she was doing better than most people we knew. I'll never forget the freezing day when my sister and I were outside in the snow playing with our friends. It was winter break from school, and when we came back to our house at 5 p.m., it was already dark. We had no lights in the house and no food. We just sat in the kitchen, preparing for another cold, hungry night, when Yong-ae appeared in the doorway with a steaming bowl of rice. I can still close my eyes and remember the incredible aroma of that rice. Probably the best thing I've ever smelled in my life. I've never had a more delicious meal, or been more grateful for a simple act of kindness. My friend Yongjia and her grandmother helped us too. Yongjia sometimes sleeps at our house, so that my sister and I wouldn't be so afraid of the dark. It's painful to write these words because I don't like to remember how I felt during those desperate times. Since then, I've hated the dark. Even now, when I'm upset and having a hard time, I turn on all the lights and make the room as bright as possible. If night never came again, I would be happy. To fill up the lonely hours, my sister and I would sing the same songs our mother soothed us with when we were babies. We wished we could just hear her voice telling us that she would come back. But there were no phones and no number where we could reach her. When my mother knocked on the door without warning one day in January, we couldn't believe it. We just threw our arms around her and we wouldn't let go. All three of us cried and cried with happiness that we were all still alive. She brought us some rice and corn and dried beans, and we were so hungry it was hard to resist cooking ourselves a big feast. But we knew the food had to last, because our mother told us she could not stay long. She had to get back to Pyongyang to earn more money and try to help out our father. The story she told was terrifying. Soon after she arrived, she found he, their father, was being held at a detention and interrogation center called a Ku Ryujiang. At first, they wouldn't let her see my father, but finally, she was able to bribe one of the guards to get in. My father was in a shocking condition. He told her the police had tortured him by beating one place on his leg until it swelled up so badly that he could barely move. He couldn't even get to the toilet, and the guards tied him in a kneeling position with a wooden stick behind his knees, causing even more excruciating pain. They wanted to know how much he had sold to smugglers and who else was involved in the operation, but he told them very little. Later, he was moved to Camp 11, a Chungsan re-education labor camp northwest of Pyongyang. This type of facility is mostly for petty criminals or women who have been captured escaping North Korea. These kinds of prisons can be as brutal as the felony level, and even the political prison camps in the North Korean Gulag. You see, when it comes to any of these communist states, the same thing was with Russia and China. It's the political enemies who are the worst. If you're a rapist, a murderer, or a thief, you're still considered a more socially desirable element. Because the theory always goes that the reason you're a murderer, rapist, or a thief is because of the difficulty of the oppression of a capitalist structure. And so the political people are bigger criminals because they're the ones who want to maintain that existing structure. This is why sometimes people who were rapists, murderers, or thieves would be given the job of running the prison camps, which staffed political prisoners. In re-education camps, the inmates are forced to work hard labor all day, in the fields or in manufacturing jobs, on so little food that they have to fight over scraps and sometimes eat rats to survive. Then they have to spend the evenings memorizing the leaders' speeches or engaging in endless self-criticism sessions. Although they have committed crimes against the people, these prisoners are thought to be redeemable, so they can be sent back to society once they have repented and finish an intensive refresher course in Kim Il-sung's teachings. Sometimes prisoners are given a trial, sometimes not. But my mother thought it was a good sign that my father had been sent to one of these so-called lighter facilities. It gave her hope that we could all be together again soon. Also, in many situations, when it came to people who had some kind of skills, they would be desired to be kept alive, and so they might receive less harsh punishments, so that their bodies can still be used as a force of labor before they die. And so a metal smuggler, considering he was quite good at doing it, and therefore has an eye for good metals, which is something very useful. You'll stick him in a re-education camp, because the torture didn't kill him, so he's also somebody who can take a beating. Once you're done with your felony charge, if you survive, you will be re-educated in these camps. and welcomed into the arms of the glorious leader society once you've learned the error of your ways. Eunmi and I were relieved to have our mother home. That night we all snuggled together by the fire, and I slept without fear for the first time in weeks. The next day, though, we woke up to detectives pounding on the door. They had come to arrest my mother for questioning about my father's crimes. But when the police officers saw that she had young children in the house, they took pity on us. They asked if she had any relatives who could take us while she was being interrogated, and she told them about my father's brother, Uncle Jin. So the police asked the head of our Inmiban to find him and bring him to our house. I believe the Inmiban is like the social family hierarchy, and there will obviously be a leader appointed. So the police asked for the head of our Imni to find him and bring him to our house. When he arrived, they ordered him to take care of us while our mother was being questioned. There may be some torture involved, because it might be that she knows something, and she might be easier to make. They didn't get any information from the man. Maybe she's more likely to sing with a little bit of torture. And she might drop some names that the man did not drop. Of course, if she does drop some names the man didn't drop, it shows that he's lying, and he'll probably be taken out of the re-education camp and back into one of the labour camps. This is why everybody has a mass distrust of each other. Because you never know when you can be informed upon by someone. And at the same time, of course, there's still this strong bond of family. Because in a country where you have very little, it's the people that are close to you really matter. And that's the brutality of a communist state. It doesn't want family. The father you should look up to is the state, and the destruction of family is very important because by removing these family bonds, you remove any kind of solidarity against the regime, which is why the family is considered evil in a communist nation. The brotherly love should be for all people. It shouldn't be higher in your family. Your love should be given to the state. Anyway, Mum's been led away. For the next few days, she had to sit in a room at the prosecutor's office in Hyesan day and night, writing statements about herself and my father and everything they had done wrong. Then a detective would read the pages and ask her more questions. At night, they would simply lock the office door and go away. In the morning, they came back to start the interrogation again. So what you're seeing here is a bit of isolation tactics. Finally, she was released. The police trusted her enough to travel, but she was told she had to return to continue her interrogation at a later time. Aomi and I were so grateful that she wasn't sent away to prison like our father. But when she came back to see us at Uncle Jin's house, we begged her to let us stay at home while she returned to Pyongyang to try and help my father. My uncle and aunt were unkind to us. They ordered us around like servants and made us feel so unwelcome that we didn't know what might happen to us when mother was gone. We told our mother we were better off staying alone and at home alone in our own house. Besides, we were learning how to take care of ourselves. She reluctantly agreed. I still cry whenever I think of the moment my mother left us again. She was wearing a beige-coloured jacket, and I was crying and holding on to it, not letting her go. Life without her was so difficult. I wanted to live like other kids, with someone to wait for me to come home, to tell me it's time for dinner or time to wake up. I just missed her so much. At first, she tried to pretend it wasn't a big deal that she was leaving again, but then she started crying with me too. Please be a good girl, Yeonmi, she said. You just have to sleep for 40 nights and I'll be home. That felt like a very long time to me. And it was. My mother would come and go frequently over the next 7 months. Often she would be gone for several weeks at a time. She had a business, buying and selling watches, clothes, and used televisions. All the things that all the things that the government didn't care much about if they caught you. But it took a long time to move all of her products. She was able to see my father only once more, and neither of them had any way of knowing how long he would be held in prison. Sometimes, when she came back to Heisan, she had no food or snacks to bring us. When we were younger, my sister and I might have complained, but not anymore. All we cared about was that she was all right, and that we were at least together for a while. Meanwhile, my sister and I had to drop out of school. Education is supposed to be free in North Korea, but students have to pay for their own supplies and uniforms, and the school expects you to bring gifts of food and other items for the teachers. We no longer had money for these things, so nobody cared if we went to class or not. Besides, Ayunmi and I had to spend all of our time just staying alive. To wash our clothes and dishes, we had to walk down to the river and break the ice. Every day or so, one of us had to stand in line for tap water, for cooking and drinking. The food our mother left with us never lasted very long, so we were very hungry and skinny. As our mother predicted, the children in town started mocking us because we were a family of criminals. This is encouraged as well by the state, the teachers, the parents. Everybody was saying that my father had destroyed our bright future and left us in a hopeless situation. We put our chins in the air and walked away from these people, but we knew that they were telling the truth. Once my father became a prisoner and was kicked out of the Workers' Party, our destiny was irreversible. There was little hope we would ever have a happy family again. After that long dark winter of hunger in 2002 and 2003, I got a painful rash on my face that cracked and bled when I went out in the sun. I was dizzy most of the time and had a bad stomach. A lot of other children suffered from the same thing, and I later found out we all had pellagra, which is caused by a lack of niacin and other minerals. Mineral deficiency. A starvation diet of mostly corn and no meat will bring on the disease, which can kill you in a few years unless you get better nutrition. After I escaped to South Korea, I was surprised to hear that the blossoms and green shoots of spring symbolize life and renewal in other parts of the world. In North Korea, spring is the season of death. It is the time of the year when our stores of food are gone, but the farms produce nothing to eat because the new crops are just being planted. Spring is when most people died of starvation. My sister and I often heard the adults who saw dead bodies on the street make clucking noises and say, "It's too bad they couldn't hold on until summer." Now, when I travel to places like America and England in April and May, I have the luxury of enjoying nature and drinking in the beauty of spring flowers. But I also remember the time when I cursed the bright green hills and wished those flowers were made of bread or candy. The only good thing about spring was that we didn't need as much wood to burn, and we could walk to the small mountains outside of town, where we could fill our bellies with bugs and wild plants so that the hunger didn't bite so sharply. Some of the plants even tasted good, like wild clover flowers. Aomi's favourite was something we called cat plant, which had small soft green leaves. We also chewed on certain roots without swallowing them, just to feel like we were putting something in our mouths. But one time we chewed on a root that made our tongues swell up, so we couldn't talk for at least an hour. After that, we were more careful. Lots of children like to chase after dragonflies. When I caught them, I ate them. Lots of boys in our neighbourhood had a plastic cigarette lighter, and they taught me how to cook a dragonfly head on an open flame. It gave off an incredible smell like roasted meat, and it tasted delicious. Later in the summer, we roasted cicadas, which were considered a gourmet treat. My sister and I would sometimes spend all day out there in the fields, trying to eat as much as we could before returning to our quiet, dark house. In late 2003, my mother came back to Heisan, and told us to pack up a few things we would need. Her interrogation was finished, and she couldn't leave us alone for another winter. Our mother sold our house so that we could have money to move back to her hometown of Kowon. But it was a tricky thing to buy and sell property in North Korea because everything belongs to the state. Because it was illegal, the sale of our house was never recorded, and there were no deeds or papers to sign. My mother and the buyer just made an oral agreement and trusted that nobody would inform on them. We were leaving the only home we had ever known. That's chapter 7. Chapter 8 is a song for Chosun, and I promise I won't make you wait 8 months for the next chapter. Let's actually say we'll do it in the next 7 days. Let's stick to that.